The auction that changed everything. The air buzzed with the hum of alien chatter, holographic displays flickering as bidders from across the galaxy gathered in the grand auction hall of Primar Station. David Carson, a human trader and adventurer, leaned against the cool metallic wall, scanning the room. He had been to countless auctions, but this one felt different. The items up for bid weren't just rare. They were mysterious, almost too good to be true. David's eyes darted to the center stage as the auctioneer, a towering reptilian figure with shimmering blue scales, raised its elongated arm to silence the crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, beings and entities, the auctioneer boomed, its voice echoing through the chamber. The next item is something truly unique, a treasure beyond imagination. Lot 347. A collective hush fell over the room as the lights dimmed. A beam of golden light illuminated the stage, and a large metal crate emerged from the floor, surrounded by swirling mist. The crate's surface glimmered, etched with alien symbols David couldn't read. "What's inside?" someone shouted from the crowd. The auctioneer smiled, a sharp, unsettling grin. "Patience, dear bidders. Lot 347 is a mystery item, but I assure you, its value is beyond compare. A one-of-a-kind prize that will change your life forever." David smirked, folding his arms. He had heard such dramatic pitches before, but something about the auctioneer's tone intrigued him. He wasn't the only one. All around him, beings of various shapes and sizes leaned forward, their eyes gleaming with curiosity and greed. The bidding began. 5,000 credits, barked a squat alien covered in orange fur. 7,000, shouted a thin, insectoid creature with shimmering wings. David hesitated, watching the frenzy unfold. He wasn't planning to bid today. He had only come to observe. But as the numbers climbed, an inexplicable urge tugged at him. Something about Lot 347 felt important. 15,000, yelled a heavy-set humanoid with tusks. The crowd gasped at the jump in price. David's pulse quickened. He couldn't explain it, but he felt drawn to the crate. Maybe it was instinct, or maybe it was sheer stubbornness. But before he could stop himself, he raised his hand. 20,000 credits, he said, his voice cutting through the noise. The room went silent, and every eye turned toward him. He met their gazes with a calm expression, though his heart was pounding. The auctioneer's grin widened. "Ah, we have a bold bidder. 20,000 credits from the human. Do I hear 25? A few murmurs rippled through the crowd, but no one else raised their hand. The price was steep, even for the wealthiest collectors. "Going once," the auctioneer said, dragging out the words. "Going twice." David held his breath, half expecting someone to outbid him. "Sold, to the human gentleman for 20,000 credits." Applause and murmurs erupted as the crate was wheeled offstage. David approached the payment terminal, his stomach twisting. He hadn't planned to spend this much, but the thrill of winning dulled his doubts, for now. Moments later, he was led to a private room where Lot 347 awaited. The crate stood in the center, its surface glowing faintly. A technician entered and pressed a series of buttons on a holographic control pad. The crate hissed, and the front panel slid open. David stepped closer, expecting to see a rare artifact or advanced alien tech. Instead, he froze. Inside the crate stood a figure, tall and slender, with silvery blue skin that shimmered under the light. Her long, flowing hair framed delicate features, and her large, luminous eyes locked onto his. She looked almost human, but there was an otherworldly grace about her. "Wait, what?" David muttered, taking a step back. The alien girl stepped out of the crate, her movements fluid and cautious. A faint, glowing collar encircled her neck, humming softly. She glanced around the room, then fixed her gaze on David. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice soft but firm. David blinked, struggling to process what he was seeing. I'm David. I thought I was bidding on an object. Not me." She interrupted, raising an eyebrow. He nodded, still dumbfounded. Yeah. What is this? Some kind of mistake. The technician cleared his throat. No mistake, sir. Lot 347 is yours now. She's bonded to you until their debt is paid. Bonded, David repeated, his voice rising. You mean she's a slave? The girl bristled at the word, her eyes narrowing. I am no one's slave, she snapped. I was collateral for my people's debt. You may have won the bid, but I belong to no one. David stared at her, his mind racing. He wanted to protest, to demand an explanation, but before he could, alarms blared throughout the station. Attention! Intruders detected, a robotic voice announced. The girl's expression darkened. They're coming for me, she said quietly. Who? David asked, his chest tightening. She turned to him, her eyes blazing with determination. Everyone. A deal he can't escape. The room was cold and dimly lit, the faint hum of the station's systems filling the uneasy silence between them. David stood across from Zara, the alien girl who now, technically, belonged to him. The golden collar around her neck glowed faintly, a silent reminder of the deal he hadn't meant to make. She was watching him with a mix of curiosity and defiance, her luminous silver blue eyes piercing right through him. David ran a hand through his hair, pacing. This has to be a mistake, he muttered. I'm a traitor, not a... whatever this is. I don't deal in people. You think I asked for this? Zara snapped, crossing her arms. Do you think I wanted to be paraded in front of a crowd of strangers, waiting to see who would win me? David stopped pacing, guilt flashing across his face. I didn't know. I thought it was some rare artifact or... An object, she interrupted, her tone sharp. Something valuable to own. He flinched at her words. That's not what I meant. Zara tilted her head, studying him. For a human, he didn't seem as arrogant as she'd expected. Still, she wasn't ready to trust him. Not yet. Before David could speak again, a knock at the door startled them both. The technician from earlier poked his head inside, looking nervous. Sir. We've, detected several ships docking without clearance. It seems they're here for her. David frowned. What do you mean, here for her? The technician stammered. Well, Lot 347, Miss Zara, was highly sought after. Some of the bidders weren't pleased with how things ended. You should leave the station immediately. Wait a second, David said, his voice rising. I just spent 20,000 credits on this, on her. And now you're telling me I have to run. The technician shifted uncomfortably. It's not safe. Those bidders, they're not the kind to take no for an answer. David turned to Zara, who was watching the exchange with a calm intensity. Do you know who these people are? He asked. They're bounty hunters, she replied. And mercenaries, maybe worse. They want me because they think I know something valuable. David narrowed his eyes. Do you? Zara didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked away, her expression unreadable. That's not important. What matters is that they won't stop until they get me. David sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. This was not how he planned to spend his day. All right, he said finally. Let's get out of here. My ship's docked on the lower level. Zara arched an eyebrow. You're helping me. I didn't sign up for this, but I'm not about to hand you over to some bounty hunters, David said, grabbing his bag. Now, are you coming or not? She hesitated, then nodded. Fine, but don't think this makes us friends. Trust me, David muttered. That's not what I'm aiming for. The docking bay was eerily quiet when they arrived, the sound of their footsteps echoing off the metallic walls. David's ship, the Silver Horizon, sat at the far end of the hangar, its sleek design standing out among the other vessels. Nice ship, Zara remarked, a hint of sarcasm in her voice. Thanks, David replied dryly, opening the hatch. Get in. They climbed aboard, and David immediately headed to the cockpit. Zara lingered, her eyes scanning the ship's interior. It was smaller than she'd expected, but surprisingly clean and well-maintained. She found herself wondering how someone like him, a trader, apparently, had managed to afford it. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of engines roaring to life. She made her way to the cockpit, where David was busy flipping switches and adjusting controls. "We're clear for takeoff," he said, glancing at her. "Strap in." Zara sat in the co-pilot's seat, fastening the harness. As the ship lifted off, the hangar doors opened, revealing the endless expanse of space. For a brief moment, Zara felt a flicker of relief. But then, a warning light flashed on the console. "Uh-oh," David muttered. "What's wrong?" Zara asked, her voice tense. "Looks like we've got company," he said, pointing to the radar. 3 ships were closing in fast, their trajectories unmistakable. Zara leaned forward, her expression grim. "Those are bounty hunters. They won't let us go without a fight." David clenched his jaw. Great, just great. The Silver Horizon accelerated, its engines humming with power. The bounty hunter ships followed, their weapons systems locking onto the smaller vessel. David swerved and dodged, trying to keep them at bay. "Do you have weapons on this thing?" Zara asked, gripping the armrests of her seat. "Of course I do," David replied, flipping a switch. "But they're not exactly top of the line." The ship shuddered as a missile exploded nearby, the shockwave rattling the cockpit. Zara glanced at the console, her mind racing. "Let me help." David hesitated, then nodded. "Fine. The weapons controls are on your right. Try not to blow us up." Zara's fingers flew across the controls, activating the ship's laser cannons. She fired at the nearest bounty hunter, hitting its engine and sending it spiraling out of control. David raised an eyebrow, impressed. "Not bad," he said. "I'm just getting started," Zara replied, her voice steady. The chase continued, the Silver Horizon weaving through asteroids and debris fields. Zara's quick reflexes and David's sharp piloting kept them one step ahead of their pursuers. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the last bounty hunter's ship was disabled, drifting helplessly in space. David let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Well, that was fun. Zara shot him a look. "This is only the beginning. They'll send more." David frowned, his hands tightening on the controls. "Then we'd better figure out why you're so important. And fast." Zara didn't reply, but the weight of her secret hung heavy in the air. As the Silver Horizon disappeared into the vastness of space, both of them knew their troubles were far from over. Enemies emerge. The Silver Horizon drifted silently in the shadow of a massive asteroid, its engines powered down to avoid detection. Inside the ship, David and Zara sat in the dimly lit cockpit, their faces tense. The adrenaline from their escape had barely worn off, and the reality of their situation was beginning to sink in. David leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "All right, Zara, we need to talk. Who are these people, and why are they so desperate to get you?" Zara hesitated, her silver blue eyes flickering with uncertainty. "It's not about me. It's about what I represent." David frowned. "That's not an answer." She sighed, leaning forward. "My people, we're known for our advancements in quantum tech. A long time ago, we developed something called the Nexus Drive. It's a propulsion system that can bend space and time, allowing instantaneous travel across the galaxy." David's eyes widened. "You're telling me you have tech that makes warp drives look like steam engines?" "Exactly," she said. "The problem is, it was stolen. My people never recovered it. We've been keeping its existence a secret to prevent wars over its control." "And you're connected to this how?" David asked. Zara's expression hardened. "I'm the last surviving member of my family, the bloodline that created the Nexus Drive. That makes me a target for anyone who wants to unlock its secrets." David exhaled sharply. "Great, So, not only did I accidentally buy a person, but I also bought the galaxy's most valuable. And hunted. Target. Technically, you didn't buy me, Zara said with a faint smirk. But yes, your life just got a lot more complicated. Before David could respond, an alert blared from the console. He turned to the radar, his heart sinking. 3 more ships had entered the area, their trajectories aimed directly at the silver horizon. They found us, Zara said, her voice steady but tense. Of course they did, David muttered, flipping switches to power up the ship's systems. The engines roared to life, and the ship jolted forward, darting out from behind the asteroid. The pursuing ships wasted no time, firing bursts of plasma that lit up the darkness of space. David pulled the silver horizon into a tight roll, narrowly avoiding the barrage. Zara, get to the weapons console, he shouted. She didn't need to be told twice. Zara sprinted to the weapons station, her hands flying over the controls. The ship's laser cannons lit up, firing rapid bursts at their attackers. One of the ships veered off, its shield sparking under the assault. These guys are persistent, David gritted out, pulling the ship into a sharp dive. They won't stop until they get me, Zara replied. Her voice was calm, but there was a steeliness in her tone that hadn't been there before. David glanced at her. You sound awfully composed for someone being hunted. I've been running my whole life, she said simply. This is just another day for me. He didn't know whether to admire her courage or be frustrated by her nonchalance. Either way, he couldn't deny she was holding her own. As the ship jolted under another near miss, Zara locked onto one of the attackers and fired. The laser cannon found its mark, and the ship exploded in a brilliant flash. That's 1 down, she said, a small smile tugging at her lips. 2 more to go, David muttered, gripping the controls tightly. The remaining ships closed in, their plasma cannons pounding against the silver horizon's shields. Warning lights flashed on the console, and David cursed under his breath. Shields are at 20%, he said. If we don't lose them soon, we're done. Zara's fingers danced over the controls, activating the ship's countermeasures. Dozens of small drones launched from the hull, scattering in every direction. The pursuing ships hesitated, their targeting systems momentarily confused by the swarm. Nice trick, David said, pulling the ship into a sharp climb. I told you, I'm not useless, Zara replied, her voice tinged with satisfaction. The distraction bought them a few seconds, but the attackers quickly adjusted, resuming their pursuit. David's mind raced as he scanned the nav map for options. Then he saw it, a massive nebula, its swirling gases glowing faintly in the distance. Hold on, he said, pushing the ship's engines to their limit. What are you doing? Zara asked, gripping the console for support. Buying us some time, David replied. That nebula should mess with their sensors. The silver horizon plunged into the nebula, the glowing gases enveloping the ship. The sensors flickered, and the radar filled with static. David relied on manual controls, weaving through the dense cloud as the ship shuddered under the strain. The pursuing ships followed, but their movements became erratic as the nebula's interference took effect. Zara seized the opportunity, targeting one of the ships and firing. The laser blast struck its engine, sending it spiraling out of control. 1 left, she said, her voice steady. David pushed the ship deeper into the nebula, the glowing gases growing thicker. The final pursuer hesitated, its pilot seemingly wary of venturing further. After a tense few moments, the ship turned and retreated. David let out a shaky breath, slumping back in his seat. We're clear. For now. Zara sat back as well, her shoulders relaxing slightly. That won't be the last of them. No kidding, David said. He glanced at her, his expression serious. If I'm going to keep risking my life for you, I need to know everything. No more secrets. Zara met his gaze, her eyes filled with determination. Then you better prepare yourself, because the truth isn't going to make this any easier. The silver horizon drifted out of the nebula, its path uncertain, but its passengers resolute. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. Revealing Zora's secret, the silver horizon cruised silently through the endless expanse of space, its engines humming softly. Inside, the atmosphere was anything but calm. David sat in the cockpit, his fingers drumming on the armrest as he watched Zora. She stood by the viewport, her arms crossed, staring out at the stars. The tension between them had been growing since their escape from the nebula. David broke the silence first. "All right, Zora. No more half-truths. I need to know why half the galaxy wants you dead, or captured." Zora turned slowly, her expression unreadable. "I already told you. It's about the Nexus drive." David shook his head. "You told me your people made it, and that it's powerful. But that doesn't explain why they think you're the key to unlocking it." She hesitated, glancing away. For a moment, David thought she might refuse to answer. Then she sighed, her shoulders slumping slightly. "My family didn't just create the Nexus drive," she began. "We bound it to our DNA. A safeguard, to ensure no one could use it without our consent. I'm the last surviving member of that bloodline." David's eyes widened. "You mean, the Nexus drive won't work unless you activate it?" She nodded. "Exactly. Without me, it's just a useless piece of tech." David leaned forward, his mind racing. "So that's why they're after you. They don't just want the Nexus drive, they want you to unlock it for them." "Not just unlock it," Zora said, her voice bitter. "They want to dissect me, extract the genetic code, and use it for themselves." David let out a low whistle. "That's horrifying." "It's my reality," she said, her tone flat. "I've been running for years, trying to stay ahead of them. But now—" She trailed off, looking at him with an intensity that made him shift uncomfortably in his seat. "Now you're involved. And that means you're a target too." David leaned back, letting her words sink in. He wasn't exactly thrilled about being hunted by the galaxy's most dangerous factions, but he couldn't bring himself to abandon her. Not after what they'd been through. Not after seeing the fear she tried so hard to hide. "So what's the plan?" he asked finally. Zora raised an eyebrow. "You're still helping me." "Do I have a choice?" he said with a wry smile. "Besides, I'm not the type to leave someone in the lurch." She studied him for a moment, as if searching for any sign of deceit. Finally, she nodded. "There's a place we can go. A refuge." David frowned. "Refuge? Where?" "It's called Eris Prime," Zora said. "A remote colony on the edge of the galaxy. It's hidden, off the grid. My people have allies there, those who survived." "Eris Prime," David repeated, punching the coordinates into the nav system. "Sounds like a good place to lay low." Zora's expression darkened. "It won't be easy to get there. The route passes through hostile territories. And even if we make it, there's no guarantee the colony is still safe." David glanced at her. "You're really selling this plan." "It's our only option," she said firmly, "unless you have a better idea." He didn't, and they both knew it. With a resigned sigh, David set the ship on course. The silver horizon shuddered slightly as it entered hyperspace, the stars outside stretching into streaks of light. The first sign of trouble came hours later. The ship's alarm blared, jolting David awake from a restless nap. He stumbled into the cockpit, where Zora was already at the controls, her face pale. "What's going on?" he asked, sliding into the pilot's seat. "Proximity alert," she said, her voice tense. "We've got company." David glanced at the radar and groaned. 3 ships were tailing them, their trajectories unmistakably hostile. "More bounty hunters." "Looks like it," Zora said. "And they're gaining on us." David powered up the engines, pushing the silver horizon to its limits. The ship lurched forward, but the pursuers kept closing the gap. Zora activated the weapons systems, but her expression was grim. "We're outgunned," she said. "Their ships are faster and better armed." "Great," David muttered. Any more good news? Zara didn't respond. Instead, she pulled up a star map and pointed to a small, uncharted system. There's a gas giant here. If we can reach it, we might be able to lose them in the atmosphere. David nodded, adjusting their course. The silver horizon veered sharply, heading for the distant planet. The bounty hunters followed, firing sporadic bursts that rattled the ship's shields. As they approached the gas giant, the planet's swirling clouds filled the viewport, a churning mass of orange and yellow. David gritted his teeth, guiding the ship into the thick atmosphere. The silver horizon shook violently, buffeted by powerful winds. "This better work," he muttered. "It will," Zara said, her tone resolute. "Trust me." The dense clouds provided cover, but navigating the turbulence was a nightmare. David fought to keep the ship steady, sweat dripping down his brow. Zora monitored the radar, her eyes darting between the screens. "They're splitting up," she said, "trying to flank us." David cursed under his breath. "Of course they are. Hold on." He pulled the ship into a steep dive, skimming the surface of the swirling clouds. The pursuing ships followed, but their movements were clumsier in the volatile atmosphere. Zara seized the opportunity, targeting one of the ships and firing. The laser blast struck its hull, sending it spiraling into the clouds. "One down," she said, her voice steady. David grinned despite the tension. "Nice shot." The remaining ships pressed on, their weapons hammering the silver horizon's shields. Warning lights flashed on the console, and David's heart sank. They couldn't take much more of this. Then Zara spotted it, a massive vortex in the clouds, swirling with blinding speed. "Head for that," she said, pointing. "Are you crazy?" David asked. "That thing will tear us apart." "It's our best chance," Zara insisted. "Trust me." David hesitated, then nodded. "All right, here we go." The ship plunged into the vortex, the winds howling around them. The pursuing ships followed, but the turbulence proved too much. One of them spun out of control, disappearing into the storm. The last ship hesitated, then turned back, retreating to safer skies. As the silver horizon emerged from the vortex, the planet's clouds thinning, David let out a shaky breath. "Remind me never to doubt you again." Zora allowed herself a small smile. "I'll hold you to that." But the relief was short-lived. They still had a long way to go, and their enemies weren't finished with them yet. The pursuit intensifies. The silver horizon sailed through the void, its hull bearing fresh scorch marks from the recent battle. Inside, the tension was palpable. David adjusted the controls with steady hands, but his mind was racing. Zara sat beside him, her face unreadable as she studied a holographic map of their route. "So, Eris Prime," David began, breaking the silence. "Tell me more about this place. What exactly are we walking into?" "It's not a place you walk into," Zora said, her tone clipped. "It's a fortress, hidden deep within an asteroid belt, surrounded by defenses. My people built it after the war to protect those of us who survived." David raised an eyebrow. "And you think it's still intact?" "It has to be," Zara replied, though there was a flicker of doubt in her voice. "It's our last sanctuary. If it's gone." She didn't finish the sentence, but the implication was clear. David frowned, his grip tightening on the controls. "Let's hope your people's paranoia is as good as you think." The ship's navigation system chimed, signaling their next waypoint. David glanced at the display and his stomach sank. "A wormhole," he muttered. Zara turned to him, her expression serious. "It's the fastest way to get to Eris Prime. Otherwise, we'd be stuck dodging patrols for weeks." "Wormholes are unpredictable," David said, his jaw tightening. "We could end up anywhere, or ripped apart." "Do you have a better idea?" Zara challenged. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "No, but if this goes sideways, I'm blaming you." Zara smirked faintly. "Fair enough." David keyed in the coordinates, and the silver horizon altered course, heading for the shimmering rift in space. The wormhole loomed ahead, a swirling vortex of light and shadow that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. David's stomach churned at the sight. "Here we go," he muttered, gripping the controls tightly. The ship entered the wormhole, and everything shifted. The cockpit lights flickered, and the viewport filled with a kaleidoscope of colors. Zara gripped the edge of her seat, her knuckles white. David focused on the controls, trying to keep the ship steady as it was buffeted by unseen forces. "Are we supposed to feel like we're being turned inside out?" he asked through gritted teeth. "Just hold it together," Zara said, her voice strained. After what felt like an eternity, the silver horizon emerged from the wormhole. The ship shuddered, and David quickly stabilized it. Outside, a field of stars greeted them, calm and serene. "Well, that wasn't so bad," David said, exhaling in relief. "Don't get too comfortable," Zara warned. "We're not safe yet." She was right. Moments later, the radar lit up with multiple signatures. A fleet of ships was waiting for them, blocking their path. David's heart sank as he recognized the insignia on the largest vessel, a crimson claw on a black field. "Pirates," he muttered. "And not just any pirates. That's the Crimson Fangs." Zara's expression darkened. "They must have tracked us through the wormhole." David's mind raced. The Crimson Fangs were infamous for their ruthlessness, and there was no way the Silver Horizon could outrun or outgun an entire fleet. "Options?" Zara asked, her voice calm despite the situation. David scanned the area, his eyes narrowing as he spotted a dense asteroid field in the distance. "We make a run for it." "That's suicide," Zara said. "Those asteroids are too dense. One wrong move and we're dead." "It's either that or let them board us," David replied. "And something tells me you don't want to be their guest." Zara didn't argue. "All right, let's do it." David pushed the ship's engines to full throttle, heading straight for the asteroid field. The pirates opened fire, plasma bolts streaking past the silver horizon. David swerved and rolled, narrowly avoiding the barrage. "Hold on," he shouted as they entered the asteroid field. Massive chunks of rock filled the space around them, spinning and colliding in a deadly ballet. David's hands flew over the controls, maneuvering the ship through the treacherous terrain. Zara kept an eye on the radar, her voice steady as she called out incoming threats. "Ship on R6, closing fast." "I see it," David replied, pulling the silver horizon into a sharp turn. The pursuing ship tried to follow, but clipped an asteroid and exploded in a fiery blaze. "One down," Zara said, "but there are more coming." David gritted his teeth, weaving through the field with precision. The remaining pirate ships struggled to keep up, their larger size making them less agile. Zara fired the ship's rear cannons, taking out another pursuer. "Nice shooting," David said. "Thanks," Zara replied, reloading the cannons. "But we're not out of this yet." The silver horizon dodged and weaved, the pirates gradually thinning as the asteroid field took its toll. Finally, the last ship peeled off, retreating to safer territory. David exhaled, slumping back in his seat. "Well, that was fun." Zara glanced at him, a faint smile on her lips. "You have an interesting definition of fun." The ship cleared the asteroid field, and the tension in the cockpit began to ease. But Zara's expression remained serious. "What's wrong?" David asked. "They'll be back," she said. "And next time, they'll bring more firepower." David nodded grimly. "Then we better make it to Eris Prime before they do." The silver horizon continued on its journey, the stars stretching endlessly ahead. The danger was far from over, but for now, they had survived. And together, they would face whatever came next. Return to her people. The silver horizon approached the dense asteroid belt that surrounded Eris Prime, the last known refuge of Zara's people. The belt was a labyrinth of spinning rocks and scattered debris, lit faintly by the dim glow of a dying star. David sat at the controls, his jaw tightened, as he guided the ship closer. Zara stood behind him, her hands gripping the back of his chair. "There it is," Zara said, pointing to a faint, glimmering structure nestled deep within the belt. "That's Eris Prime." David squinted, barely able to make out the fortress. It was hidden among the asteroids, its design blending seamlessly with the surrounding rock. "Subtle," he muttered. "I can see why no one's found it." Zara didn't respond. Her focus was on the fortress, her expression a mix of hope and dread. "We need to send the recognition code," she said. "If they don't know it's me, they'll destroy us before we get close." David gestured to the console. "Be my guest." Zara leaned over, typing a series of symbols into the comm system. A moment later, a soft chime sounded, followed by a robotic voice. "Identity confirmed. Zara Solaris. Access granted." David let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "That's a relief." "Don't relax yet," Zara said. "We're not inside." As the ship maneuvered closer, David noticed the array of automated turrets and defense systems lining the perimeter. They tracked the silver horizon with unnerving precision, their weapons primed. Zara's fingers hovered over the controls, ready to send another code if necessary. The ship passed through a massive energy field that shimmered like liquid light. The turbulence rattled the silver horizon, but it emerged intact. On the other side, a sprawling structure came into view. A massive asteroid converted into a fortress, bristling with defenses. Ships of varying designs docked along its exterior, and faint lights indicated activity within. David couldn't help but whistle. "Impressive." "It has to be," Zara said. "This is the last bastion of my people." The silver horizon landed in a dimly lit hangar bay. Zara wasted no time, striding toward the exit ramp as the ship powered down. David followed, his instincts on high alert. He didn't know what kind of reception to expect, but he doubted it would be warm. As they stepped off the ramp, a group of armed guards approached. They were tall, with silver-blue skin like Zara's, their uniforms sleek and functional. At the center of the group was an older woman with sharp features and an air of authority. "Zara," the woman said, her tone both surprised and wary. "You're alive." "Barely," Zara replied. "Is the council still intact?" The woman nodded. "Yes, but we've been under siege for months. Resources are dwindling, and morale is low. Your arrival will raise many questions." David cleared his throat, drawing the woman's attention. Her eyes narrowed as she looked him over. "And who is this?" "This is David," Zara said. "He's the reason I'm here." The woman's gaze hardened. "You brought a human here. Do you have any idea how dangerous that is?" David raised his hands in mock surrender. "Hey, I didn't ask for this. I just happened to be the guy who accidentally bought her at an auction." The woman's expression turned icy. "An auction?" Zara stepped forward. "It's a long story, Kyra, but he's with me, and we don't have time for debates. The Crimson Fangs are after us, and they know about Eris Prime." Kyra's eyes widened. "The Fangs? How?" "Because of me," Zara admitted. "They've been tracking me ever since the Nexus drive was mentioned. We need to prepare." Inside the fortress, Zara led David through winding corridors carved into the asteroid's interior. The walls glowed faintly, powered by advanced technology that seemed far beyond anything David had seen before. They reached a large chamber where a group of Zara's people had gathered, their expressions a mix of relief and suspicion. A holographic map of the surrounding asteroid belt hovered in the center of the room, displaying defensive positions and incoming threats. Zara addressed the group, her voice steady. "The Crimson Fangs know we're here," she said. "It's only a matter of time before they attack. We need to fortify our defenses and prepare for the worst." A murmur of unease rippled through the crowd. One of the elders, a tall man with a commanding presence, stepped forward. "And what of the Nexus drives, Zara? Is it still safe?" Zara hesitated, glancing at David. "I don't know, but if they reach Eris Prime, nothing will be safe." The elder's gaze shifted to David. And this human, can he be trusted? David held up his hands. Look, I'm just trying to survive here. If helping Zora means keeping your fortress intact, then I'm all in. The elder studied him for a moment, then nodded reluctantly. Very well. But if you betray us? David cut him off. Yeah, I get it. You don't need to finish that sentence. The days that followed were a whirlwind of preparation. David worked alongside Zora's people, helping to repair damaged defenses and modify the fortress's systems. His knowledge of human engineering proved invaluable, earning him wary respect from those who had initially doubted him. Zora, meanwhile, coordinated strategies with the council, her leadership skills shining through. Despite the odds, she refused to back down, inspiring her people to stand strong. Late one night, David found Zora in the observation chamber, staring out at the stars. He approached cautiously, not wanting to disturb her thoughts. Couldn't sleep, he asked. She glanced at him, a faint smile on her lips. I haven't slept properly in years. David leaned against the wall, crossing his arms. You've been through a lot. So have you, she replied. You didn't have to help me, you know. You could have walked away. He shrugged. Yeah, but then I'd have missed out on all this excitement. Zora laughed softly, the sound almost musical. You're either brave or foolish. Maybe both, David said, grinning. But I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere. For the first time, Zora's guarded expression softened. In that moment, she wasn't just a fugitive or a leader. She was someone who had found a glimmer of hope in an otherwise dark world. But as the stars glimmered outside, both of them knew the coming battle would test them in ways they could scarcely imagine. A new beginning. The dim glow of the fortress's command chamber flickered as Zora and David stood before the holographic map. Around them, the atmosphere was tense, the air thick with anticipation. Every person in the room was preparing for the inevitable, the final battle against the Crimson Fangs, the enemy fleet, now converging on Eris Prime, outnumbered and outgunned them. Zora's people had fortified their defenses, but they all knew it might not be enough. David placed his hands on the edge of the console, leaning forward. All right, here's the plan. If we can draw their lid ships into the asteroid field, we might be able to use the environment to our advantage. Those big cruisers won't maneuver well in tight spaces. Zora nodded, her silver-blue eyes scanning the map. And the automated turrets along the outer belt can provide cover fire, but we'll need to disable their command ship to scatter their forces. Easier said than done, one of the council members muttered. That ship is a fortress in itself. David straightened, determination etched on his face. Then we hit it from the inside. The room fell silent, all eyes turning to him. You're suggesting a boarding mission? Zora asked, her voice steady but questioning. David nodded. Exactly. Their command structure relies on that ship. If we take out their leader, the rest of the fleet will fall apart. You're talking about a suicide mission, another elder said, shaking his head. David smirked. Not if we do it right. Hours later, the Silver Horizon launched from the fortress, its engines humming softly as it glided into the asteroid belt. The Crimson Fangs had arrived, their fleet forming an imposing wall of warships. Plasma cannons lit up the darkness as the first wave of fighters descended on Eris Prime. Zora sat in the co-pilot's seat, her fingers gripping the armrests. You sure about this? She asked, her voice barely audible over the hum of the ship. David grinned, his confidence unwavering. Not even a little. But that's never stopped me before. She shook her head, a small smile tugging at her lips despite the gravity of the situation. You're unbelievable. And you're lucky I am, he shot back. Now, let's get to work. The Silver Horizon darted through the chaos, dodging enemy fire as it weaved between asteroids. Zora manned the weapons, firing precise bursts that kept their pursuers at bay. The ship shuddered under the strain, but David's sharp piloting kept them in the fight. As they approached the enemy command ship, its massive bulk loomed before them, bristling with weapons. Zara's hands flew over the controls, activating the ship's cloaking system. The silver horizon flickered, then disappeared from view. "Cloaks engaged," Zara said, "but it won't last long." "It just needs to get us inside," David replied, guiding the ship toward a maintenance hatch on the command ship's underside. The silver horizon docked smoothly, its landing gear locking into place. David grabbed his gear and turned to Zara. "You ready?" She nodded, her expression fierce. "Let's end this." The interior of the command ship was dark and labyrinthine, the air thick with the hum of machinery. David and Zara moved silently, their steps muffled by the ship's grates. David's pulse raced as they navigated the corridors, relying on Zara's knowledge of similar ships to guide them. They encountered their first patrol near the central core, a group of heavily armed guards. Zara gestured for David to stay back, then moved with fluid precision, disabling one guard with a swift strike to the neck. David followed her lead, taking out another with a stun baton. "Remind me not to get on your bad side," he whispered as they moved on. "Smart choice," she replied, a glint of humor in her eyes. They reached the command center, a sprawling room filled with glowing consoles and holographic displays. At its center stood the leader of the Crimson Fangs, a hulking alien with crimson armor and a menacing presence. He turned as they entered, his glowing yellow eyes narrowing. "So the fugitive and her human pet," he growled. "I expected you to run, not walk into your doom." David smirked, raising his weapon. "Funny. I was about to say the same thing." The fight that followed was brutal. The leader's guards swarmed them, their weapons blazing. Zara moved like a blur, her agility unmatched as she dodged and countered. David's human ingenuity came into play, using the environment to his advantage, overloading consoles to create explosions and using cover to outmaneuver his foes. Finally, Zara confronted the leader. He towered over her, his claws gleaming, but she was undeterred. With a combination of strategy and sheer determination, she brought him to his knees, her blade pressed against his throat. "It's over," she said, her voice cold. The leader sneered. "You think killing me will change anything? The Fangs are bigger than one man." "No," Zara said, "but your fleet will fall apart without you." With a swift motion, she incapacitated him, leaving him unconscious on the floor. David activated the ship's self-destruct mechanism, setting a timer that would ensure the Crimson Fangs wouldn't recover their command ship. "Time to go," David said, pulling Zara toward the exit. They sprinted back to the silver horizon, barely escaping as the command ship erupted in a fiery explosion. The remaining ships in the fleet scattered, their disarray evident as they fled the battlefield. Back at Eris Prime, the mood was one of cautious celebration. The fortress had held, and the Crimson Fangs had been dealt a decisive blow. Zara's people looked to her with newfound respect, their hope rekindled. David stood on a balcony overlooking the asteroid belt, his thoughts a whirlwind. Zara joined him, her expression softer than he'd ever seen it. "You did it," she said. "We did it," he corrected. "I couldn't have done this without you." She smiled, a genuine warmth in her eyes. "Thank you, David, for everything." He shrugged, grinning. "Just another day in the life of a humble trader." Zara laughed softly, the sound carrying a hint of relief. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of peace. The battle was over, but her journey was just beginning. And she knew she wouldn't face it alone. As the stars shimmered in the distance, the silver horizon prepared for its next adventure, carrying two unlikely allies toward a future neither could have imagined.